We're at a pivotal point, a milestone moment in the National Football League history, and a great point in our series on the pre-Super Bowl NFL championship games, the 1958 season, that culminated in the greatest game ever played. We have more from our historic expert on just a moment in the Baltimore Colts 1958 season as they played the New York Giants. Coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history, and welcome to another edition of our NFL Championship Series, where we're covering all the seasons of championship games before the Super Bowl in the National Football League, 1933 to 1965. And we are really winding through this and having a blast doing it with having expert guests coming on from the team that represent the team that won the championship that season. And tonight we're in 1958, and we are going to have a great guest, a returning guest. His name is Jim Johnson. You may remember him from a couple years ago talking about some Redskins teams. Jim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Great to be back with you, Darren. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Jim, this is exciting. This is the Colts are right in your wheelhouse. We know you like to talk about all the teams from your area. Of course, the Baltimore teams. You got a Ravens banner in the background, the Redskins, Commanders franchise, and this Colts franchise that really had some great teams in the 1950s.
Right, and for your video viewers, I don't know how much of it's coming up here, but I have my Johnny Unitas jersey on. Figure if I'm ever going to wear it, tonight's the night to do it, right?
Yeah, very appropriate, very appropriate. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, what was the flavor or the temperature of the NFL in 1958, and maybe guide us right up into the Colts.
Well, it was really an interesting period, Darren. It was going into a transition, and in the late 50s, early 60s, really just flipped over the entire NFL, I think. And the dominant teams in most of the 50s, as you well know, were the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions, which, to somebody who's not a student of history, sounds ridiculous to say that now, although the Lions have bounced back the last couple of years. But they were basically trading championships for most of that time. And the only team that had kind of stuck their nose in there and won one was the New York Giants. And they were the closest thing the NFL had to a marquee or even perhaps a glamour team at that point. And the interesting thing was that so much of the NFL was at that time, it was focused on defense. And the 50s had been, with the Los Angeles Rams and the Browns, had been an offensive period, but it was shifting more into teams focusing on good defense and a ground game. And the big defense of the time was the Giants defense. And they were, I would think, the first really marquee defense because the offensive players and teams had gotten all the attention before that. But they were winning on defense. They won the championship in 56. And that was the start of a pretty good run for them, which they made the playoffs, which meant they won their division. Remember, there was one playoff game back in the day. And they made most of them over the course of the next 8-9 years. But they never won another one. They were an early version of the Buffalo Bills in the early 90s to some extent, except without the exciting offense. But having a good and popular team with stars in New York was a boon for the NFL. They were still working to get TV exposure, to become a national league, really. They'd only been on the West Coast for a few years. And at that time, New York was so important and so dominant to drawing attention to a sports league. And, obviously baseball had the Yankees and Dodgers and Giants for so many years. Now the New York football Giants, as they still are known on occasion, right, drew some of that attention away. And they had gotten basically the seal of approval when they moved. A lot of people don't realize they played at the old Polo Grounds for many, many years. And in the 50s, they moved into Yankee Stadium, which was the big time. As far as a pro sports stadium, I don't think you got any more bigger time than going to Yankee Stadium. So, they were the team to beat. But then you had this kind of spunky team in Baltimore that was kind of sneaking up on people. The Colts had only been there since 1953, and they got the Orioles in '54. But Baltimore really hadn't made a mark on anything. The Orioles were still building and were years away from being good, and the Colts had moved up to, I think it was 7-7, a record in, or excuse me, 6-6 in 1956, or excuse me, 57. But they had this young quarterback named Johnny Unitas, who had gotten the job by default, and nobody really knew much about him yet. But even back then, the quarterbacks had the marquee level, and obviously in 1958, the Colts and Johnny U became as close to household names as the NFL was going to get in the late 50s.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. I don't think people appreciate, how important the 1958 season was. Not only for it's sort of the line of demarcation of the NFL being sort of the ugly stepchild of college football till they start gaining equal footing with it. And I think the rise of that Colts team, who just a few years earlier that the franchise didn't exist. I mean, this is the second generation of the Baltimore Colts into the NFL. This isn't the same Colts franchise that came from the AAFC. So it's kind of refreshing to see a team that spawned and grew that quickly to go to the highest point of the most famous league at that time, and take its championship. So that's kind of cool.
So, the Colts had come from the humble beginnings of being the Dallas Texans in 1952, and that team basically went bankrupt. And the league took them over, and they wound up playing the end of the 1952 season in, of all places, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And one of the players on that team was a very familiar name, Artie Donovan. And he wrote in his autobiography a little bit about they didn't win very many games, but boy, did they have a lot of fun because nobody, it was just, well, what, we're not going to win, so we might as well just go ahead and enjoy ourselves. But they when they got into Baltimore, they gradually built a team. They had solid ownership, and they had an intense interest from the fans. Baltimore was and I don't, I'm still not clear what happened to the first franchise that things went so poorly for it. But I think they just needed good management, good ownership, and building the new stadium. At that time, they were finishing up Memorial Stadium. The city went nuts over the Colts, and as successful as the Orioles have been through that time, Darren, Baltimore was first and foremost a Colts town. I mean, the Colts were deep, deep in the heart and deep in the community. No coincidence there in Baltimore, and there is a very, very strong bond that built very quickly. And then by the time that had solidified, the team was really good, and that obviously helped.
Yeah, most definitely. And but you say, like you say, they accumulated so much talent from nobody really knew about these guys, including Unitas, who I'm sad to say, as a Western Pennsylvania, was shipped off by the Steelers. He wouldn't even make the team that in his first year, and he was a
Isn't that
Pittsburgh
one of
guy.
the great one-ifs of the NFL is if he'd stayed with the Steelers, huh?
Yeah, yeah. And well, they also got rid of Len Dawson and Jack Kemp, and kept Ted Marchibroda at the same time. So, oh, it's not good
But
to say.
that's why they didn't make the playoffs until 1972, right?
Right, right, right. So, so the major competition, for the Colts, because the Colts were oddly enough at that time in those few years, they were in the Western Division of all things. And who were the competition in the West for the Colts?
Well, the West was not very strong at that time. You figured the Lions were going to be, because if I'm remembering this correctly, they were the defending champions from
Yes.
'57, and they fell back into the pack, and the Bears emerged as their primary competition. But they really did not have, especially down the stretch of the season, it was not a tight race. The Colts were very much in control of that race from midseason on. They had a game with the Bears around midseason that they won, and got some distance between them, and they pretty well cruised to the Western Division Championship.
And it's kind of odd that the Bears rose. Well, not odd, but maybe it shouldn't be a mystery. But Patty Driscoll, who had been a star for them for years, was their coach the previous few years, where they had on some bad seasons or mediocre seasons, I guess. But 58, George Halas takes back the reins again for like the fourth or fifth time of coaching the Bears and owner, and they rise up again to play some good ball and make a little run of it again with the Colts, and eventually dominate. So that's kind of an odd little story too.
Yeah, no one ever said Hallis wasn't a good coach, did they? And when you're the owner, I guess you can coach whenever you feel like it too, right?
Yeah, most definitely. Okay, so how about in the East? Who were the competition level there in the East? The Giants.
Well, it was a similar situation, except this one actually played out where, talked a few minutes ago about Detroit and Cleveland being the dominant teams. And, everyone expected Cleveland to be the primary contender along with the Giants in the East. And that's exactly how it played out. And they were tooth and nail dogfight the whole year through. And in fact, back in those days with the one playoff game, the championship game, they always had a week in between the end of the regular season and the championship game in case there was a tie. Because when you have a 12-game season, you got a pretty good chance you're going to have a tie. And they didn't have all the tiebreaker formulas figured out like they do in a computer now, right? So that year, Pat Summerall, yes, Pat Summerall, kicked a field goal that got the Giants into a playoff game with Cleveland. They tied for the Eastern Championship, and then the Giants prevailed in what must have been a thrilling 10-0 Eastern Division playoff game, which didn't exactly set the tone for what the championship game was going to be, but it got them in there. So and that's just how those two teams played. It was even in the early days of that rivalry, it was Jim Brown versus Sam Huff, and boy, they had some wars, and they had I guess three of them that year since they played each other twice in the regular season. So it was some fierce football.
Yeah, most certainly. And speaking of Jim Brown, he was on fire that year. 12-game season, like you said, he had over 1,500 yards rushing. So you can tell what a dominant force that he was there. Now, I don't even think that was his biggest season, but he had a great season for the Browns that year.
Well, he did, and obviously Jim Brown was an amazing football player, and you wonder how many yards he could have had if he had played until his body told him to stop instead of his acting career.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Okay, so we have all the makings for a great championship game. You have, this Colts team that's overcome and won their division, and now you have the Giants that have, fought it out tooth and nail, like you said, with the Browns, and they've won and overcome. So how does the championship game play out?
Well, the Giants were favored because they were the known quantity. The Colts were the kind of the coming out of nowhere to a lot of people, and the game was in Yankee Stadium. Back then, they just rotated between the Eastern and Western Division champions hosting it, and it was the Giants' turn. Um, but something that worked against the Giants, and if you look at the film after Alan Amici, well, I don't want to spoil the result here for
Hmm.
those that know it, but at the end of the game, there were thousands of Colts fans that charged the field, which was kind of strange because a lot of people look at that and figure the game must have been in Baltimore. But one thing that happened during that time was there is a newspaper strike in New York City, and that was the biggest hype machine of these games was the newspapers printing it. They were out for I think maybe 2 weeks. So without the hype, they didn't actually sell as many tickets as they thought, and they had estimates between 10 to 15,000 people come up on the trains from Baltimore, and I guess they were all in the lower deck because they were able to storm the field after the game. It was quite a sight. So definitely still a home field advantage for the Giants, but Baltimore was extremely well represented in that crowd at Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, this is my father-in-law who he was ill for a while and probably like 10, 15 years ago, that's when they did the colorization and had it very famously on ESPN, and it was sort of the debut of the color. My father-in-law was, was bedridden at the time, but that was his game. That was the Giants were his team, and he remembered that game as a kid so vividly. I don't think he attended it, but just listened on the radio or however he took it in, and that was kind of neat to watch that with somebody that from that, that enjoyed that era of football that, long before I was around. And it was kind of fun to watch. And he, sort of built it up for me. And just like you said, it was kind of an exciting thing, be at Yankee Stadium, big game, December, the holiday season's going, and there's some good football getting played.
Yeah, there was, and I might be jumping ahead here, but I'm afraid I'll forget to tell the story that the fans almost didn't see the end of that game. I don't know if you've heard that story.
No.
The end of the regulation of the championship game, people almost didn't get to see it because there had been, and I think the story is maybe a rat chewed through it or something, but the cable that was bringing the signal out from the stadium got cut and they lost the signal at the network. So some brilliant uh, guy on the production crew told probably one of the young guys who could run, said, run out on the field, stall, run around, let him chase you around, give us a few minutes to fix this thing because there was nothing built in to just, okay, wait a minute, we got to stop the game for TV because it's still a relatively new thing for the NFL game. So he did his job very well, and they were able to get the broadcast on. I think they may have missed a couple of plays, but they were fortunately able to, because it was late in the fourth quarter when this happened. But fortunately, they were able to get the end of regulation in and the overtime. Uh, Boy, wouldn't that have been something, right?
Yeah, most definitely. But we don't even know what would have happened, if this happened 10, 15 years earlier, because I don't think they had anything in place for overtime games at that time, back in the late 30s, because there were some close ones where it came down like a last second play or the last few minutes of scoring. But I think the NFL figured out, hey, we may have some tie games here, probably sometime after World War II when they made a bunch of other changes with substitution and everything. And this is the first time we get to see, overtime in a big game in the NFL.
Right. And a lot of the players said after the game they weren't really sure what would happen. They thought, "Oh, do we tie?" You know, they just didn't know. So yeah, this was brand new.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about, the scoring during the game, what gets us to the tie game?
I want to say this, and this might be bordering on controversial, but uh, yeah, this game is called the greatest game ever played. And I think it is the most important game ever played. It wasn't necessarily that great of a game. Okay, it was dramatic, but there was not a lot going on throughout a lot of it. The Colts had gone out to a 14-3 halftime lead. Unitas had thrown a touchdown pass. Alan Amici had scored a touchdown. And they were pretty well in control, but the Giants' defense really took over in the second half, and they had forged ahead, 17-14 late in the game, and that's when the nation really got introduced to Johnny Unitas because he put on a drive that fans got to see time and time again after that. And the kind of thing he had been doing all season for the Colts is they moved down the field very methodically, pass, run, pass, just a mix. Because remember back then, quarterbacks were calling their own plays, and Unitas had a great way of using all his weapons and mixing his weapons very well. And he mixed the run and the pass, didn't panic, didn't rush, and got them in field goal range. And Steve Meyer, a name who is not familiar to a lot of people, but
Hmm.
because kickers were not that big a deal back then, like they are now, he was able to punch in a 20-yard field goal on the last play of regulation to force the overtime. But it was a very dramatic 2-minute drill, as it's now known. And I don't think they even had a name for it back in '58. But it was again something that Unitas became known for, if nothing else, is he was the guy you wanted to run your team in the 2-minute drill, and he showed it to an enraptured nationwide audience against one of the great defenses of that generation, the Giants defense.
Yeah, that had to be tremendous to be there in the stands and to witness this. And I guess you could almost say maybe is it fair to say that Johnny Unitas is sort of that the model that later quarterbacks, the Brady's and all the greats, Joe Montana's, of these great comebacks of these running the 2-minute drills and 4-minute drills. He might be the model for that set offenses ahead at the end of halves, quite possibly
Oh,
just with that
Darren, I
game.
couldn't agree more with that. I think Unitas was the model for a lot of quarterbacks in the '60s and '70s. He was the model of so much of the modern professional quarterback, and in that way in particular, I think again that was kind of his signature, was the 2-minute drill.
So you have a lot of things going on here, and we said, earlier that,
Yeah.
this is a watershed moment. They call it the greatest game ever played, and like you said, it wasn't the greatest game on the field being played, but there's so many things. It was almost like everything came to a head at this point in this December in Yankee Stadium with, the Unitas coming to be and becoming who Johnny Unitas is known as now, the legend. Uh, the being played at Yankee Stadium, an overtime game, in a championship game, just all the images and television starting to capture, the games on film a little bit better than they ever had before, and getting more people outside the stadium involved in the game as well and taken in. I mean, it's just tremendous, and it really put the NFL on a course to really accelerate in their viewership and their popularity and to really catch up eventually with college football.
Well, yeah, this was the first big National Football League event, as it turned out, and the watershed moment for them on TV. I think if this game had been 31-0, there's things that may have eventually happened, but not as quickly as they did. If you don't have that game, you don't have the American Football League starting in 1960. I'm firmly convinced of that, because the attention that swelled up from that game got investors interested in putting their money into football, which back then there was still not a lot of money floating around in professional football. Now all of a sudden, in a year and a little over a year and a half after that game, you have a whole new professional football league, and that really birthed the modern football structure that we're so used to now, AFC, NFC.
Yeah, and some of the names that came out of this game, not only the players, we've talked about, Summerall and Unitas and Sam Huff playing in this game, but these coaching staffs are, I mean,
Oh,
they're legendary. These are like the Mount Rushmore of coaches for the NFL at that period. And maybe, yeah, you could tell us a little bit about who was coaching these teams.
yeah, the coaches, especially on the Giants side, the everybody will recognize the names of the offensive and defensive coordinator. Vince Lombardi was the offensive coordinator for the Giants, and uh, Tom Landry was the defensive coordinator for the Giants. So I don't know if you'd ever looked at a more awesome pair of coordinators on a team at one time. Of course, nobody knew that then, and it's worth mentioning that Lombardi's offense wasn't all that great, even though they had a couple of Hall of Famers on the offense, like Frank Gifford, of course everybody remembers. But that's one of the great what ifs. Their head coach, by the way, is named Jim Lee Howell, which is a name very unfamiliar to a lot of people, and he was winding down his career. Lombardi really wanted that head coaching job, but he felt that Jim Lee Howell was not ready to retire. He coached 2 more years for the Giants, and then he was concerned that Landry was kind of their favorite anyway, because let's face it, his defense, Landry's defense, was carrying that team. So when he got the offer to coach the Packers in 1959, which was a desolate wasteland of pro football, hard as that may be to believe, he figured he had to take it or else he might not get another shot. So one of the great what ifs you look at, again, to go to that phrase is, what if either one of those coordinators had wound up coaching the Giants? And, and especially the long, incredible run that Landry had. You just have to wonder what would have happened with the Cowboys. Hard to maybe Lombardi would have got you can have a lot of fun with that if you have some time to kill and just want to get into that kind of game.
Yeah, but I think some of the reasons that they got their jobs in Dallas and Green Bay respectively might be the success they had in making this, well, they won the championship in 56, but this 58 game being so popular, and now their names are coming to the forefront, and it really helped spread the popularity and the power surge of the NFL to other places that, Dallas didn't have a team at the time. And you said, Green Bay was kind of on the lower side of things as far as winning in that era. And so now you've sort of spread the wealth out in the coaching ranks, and it really helped make the NFL popular too. So again, something stems from this 58 season.
Well, yeah, because you look by the mid 60s, Dallas and Green Bay are two of the marquee teams in the league. So that was pretty amazing. And let's not give short shift to the Colts head coach, another familiar name, Weeb Ewbank, also in the Hall of Fame, although partially because of what he did 10 years later against the Colts, but that's for another show.
Right. And so, yeah, I was going to mention that too. Great coaching on the other side as well with Weeb Ewbank. So, Jim, this has been a great, and do you have any last thoughts that you want to say about this 58 season?
Well, it just, as you said, I go back to it being an inflection point for the league. If anybody wants to go to a point where the beginning of modern football emerged, this is the game. And I wouldn't even say the season. That was the game, December 27, 1958, or it was 28th. I was 11 days old when that game was played, so memory's a little fuzzy of that. But that right there was the birth of the modern NFL, and I think it's done pretty well for itself ever since then, don't you?
Yeah, I think they hit a winner there. Winner
Yes.
chicken dinner.
Yes, indeed.
Well, Jim, that was great, and we would like to have you come on and carry on with this conversation, and we'll take that up in the next episode where we get into the 1959 season.
Be happy to do that, Darren. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.